Welcome to the deep dive,
Yeah,
where we really get into the research, roll up our sleeves and dig in.
absolutely. Get down to the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. And today we're taking a deep dive into something that's pretty fascinating, especially for anyone who loves those squishy face pups. We're talking discospondylitis in French and English bulldogs.
Yeah, it's a topic that's close to my heart, especially seeing as we've got this recent research article that sheds some really interesting light on why this disease seems to be more common in these breeds.
It's like we all adore those adorable wrinkles and those smooshed faces, but this research really makes you stop and think about the health trade-offs,
It really does.
So for those who might not be familiar, let's break down what discospondylitis actually is.
Okay, so discospondylitis, it's basically a bacterial infection. And this infection, what it does is it attacks the intervertebral discs.
The intervertebral disc.
Yeah, those are like the cushions,
Yeah, cool.
between the spinal bones.
Right.
And it also goes after the end plates of the vertebrae. So imagine those discs, the ones that are supposed to be acting like shock absorbers. They get all inflamed, all infected. Not a party any dog wants an invite to.
No kidding. Ouch. That sounds incredibly painful. Poor pups. And this study zeroes in on French and English bulldogs. What is it about these breeds that makes them more prone to this?
Well, what's really fascinating is that the researchers found that these breeds, they have a significantly higher prevalence of discospondylitis.
Significantly higher, compared to other breeds.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We're talking 3.4 times higher in French bulldogs.
Wow.
And a whopping 4.3 times higher in English bulldogs.
Wow. So you're telling me if we had a group of Frenchies, there's a much higher chance we'd find one with discospondylitis than say in a group of Labradors.
Yeah, that's basically what the research is telling us.
Wow. That's a pretty big difference. Okay, so we've established that French and English bulldogs, they seem to be more susceptible to this. But here's the million-dollar question. Why? What's the link between those adorable squishy faces and this painful spinal infection?
Well, and this is where the research really digs deep. It seems that those classic bulldog features, the flat faces, the cute, often curly tails.
Yeah, they're trademarks, basically.
Exactly. Well, they're connected to something called congenital vertebral body malformations.
Congenital vertebral body malformations. Okay, so for those of us who didn't ace anatomy, what exactly are we talking about here?
Sure. So basically, we're talking about irregularities in the bones of the spine.
Their spines are different.
Yeah. And these malformations, they're way more common in what we call screw-tailed brachycephalic breeds, which includes, you guessed it, our French and English bulldogs.
So you're saying there's a connection between those signature looks and these spinal issues?
That's what the research is suggesting. And get this, they actually found that discospondylitis was significantly associated with these malformations, especially in those specific intervertebral disc spaces.
So it's like those malformations, they create this weak spot in the spine, making it easier for an infection to set in. Is that right?
That's one of the leading theories, yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
we've talked about these malformations, but the study, it also looked at different types of these malformations, right?
It did. And this is where things get even more interesting. Remember how I mentioned English bulldogs and French bulldogs? Well, they found that in English bulldogs, the discospondylitis was exclusively associated with ventral and median aplasia.
Ventral and median aplasia. Hold on, those are those butterfly vertebrae we hear about, right?
You got it. Butterfly vertebrae. That's exactly what they are. And in this study, they were the only type of malformation that they found linked to discospondylitis in the English bulldogs they looked at, which is really fascinating when you think about it.
It is. It's like a specific type of malformation that's linked to this condition.
Wow. What about the French bulldogs? What kind of malformations did they tend to have?
So for them, it was more commonly associated with something called ventral aplasia. It's also known as dorsal hemivertebra, if you want to get technical.
Dorsal hemivertebra. Got it. Okay, so they were seeing different types of malformations depending on the type of bulldog. That's really interesting. But hold on. Didn't the study also look at something else, something about kyphosis?
Oh, yeah, the kyphosis connection. That's another piece of the puzzle that I thought was so interesting.
Okay, so for those of us who need a little refresher course, remind us what exactly is kyphosis?
Sure. Kyphosis is basically, it's that outward curvature of the spine. It's fairly common to a certain degree in these brachycephalic breeds like our bulldog friends here.
Right. It's part of what gives them that distinctive, that kind of hunched over look, right? Exactly. It's part of their charm. But here's the thing. What they found is that there was a link between the location of the most severe kyphosis, so where that curve was the most prominent, and where the discospondylitis was showing up in these dogs.
So the infection tended to be worse where their spines were more curved.
You got it. Now, we don't know for sure why this is, but it does suggest that, the abnormal way the spine moves caused by those malformations and that resulting kyphosis, it might be creating these like little pockets of vulnerability.
Like areas where blood flow might be different, or maybe where the discs are just under way more stress.
Exactly. And those areas, they become prime targets for bacteria to just kind of move in, set up shop, and cause an infection.
Wow. So it's not just the malformations themselves, it's how those malformations affect the overall shape and structure of the spine that seems to play a role in this whole discospondylitis thing.
You got it. This study really emphasizes that we got to look at the whole picture, the whole spine when we're talking about these breeds and why they might be more susceptible to this disease.
It's like one of those domino effects you see in like those old movies. One thing leads to another, and before you know it, you've got this whole chain reaction happening.
That's a great analogy. And I think this research, it's like finding one of those crucial dominoes in the chain. It doesn't give us all the answers, but it does give us some pretty significant clues about how these spinal malformations, that kyphosis, and that increased risk of discospondylitis, how they might all be connected.
And those clues, they could be really important, for guiding future research and hopefully finding ways to help us better care for these breeds.
Absolutely. And what I thought was really interesting was they didn't just stop at identifying the malformations. They took it a step further.
They did, yeah.
What was that? They actually looked at the specific types of malformations that were there, and more importantly, where those malformations were located in the spine.
Okay.
And that's where things get, even more intriguing, especially when we start talking about those English bulldogs and those butterfly vertebrae we mentioned.
Right, those butterfly vertebrae. It was like every single English bulldog in the study with discospondylitis had them. What did they find out about them?
Well, remember how we talked about how they were in every single English bulldog with discospondylitis in the study?
Yeah, it was a striking correlation for sure.
Right. So they started looking at, okay, where exactly are these butterfly vertebrae located in the spine? And get this, they often found that the location of these malformations, it coincided with the area where the discospondylitis was most severe.
So it's not just having them, it's where they are too that seems to matter.
Exactly. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? The shape of those butterfly vertebrae, especially when they pop up in certain areas of the spine, they can create these weak points. And those weak points, well, they can make the discs that are right next to them way more susceptible to getting infected.
It's like they create the perfect environment for an infection to take hold.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for vets to be aware of these patterns, knowing that the location of those butterfly vertebrae could actually be a predictor of where discospondylitis is more likely to develop. That's huge. It could really change how we approach imaging and diagnosis in these dogs.
It's like having a more, I don't know, a more precise lens to look through when we're assessing these cases.
Yeah.
And speaking of a more precise lens, you mentioned earlier that they looked at something else too, besides the malformations themselves. Something about kyphosis.
Oh, yes, the kyphosis connection. That's another part of this that I found so fascinating.
Okay, so for those of us who might need a little anatomy refresher, remind us again what kyphosis is exactly.
Sure. Kyphosis. It's basically an outward curvature of the spine. We see it, well, it's fairly common, at least to some degree, in brachycephalic breeds, or bulldog fens.
Right, it's part of what gives them that really distinctive, that kind of hunched over look.
Exactly. It's part of their signature look. But what they found was that there was a link between the location of the most severe kyphosis, so where that curve is the most prominent, and the areas where we see discospondylitis popping up in these dogs.
So the infection tended to be in the areas where the spine was the most curved.
You got it. And while we don't know for sure why that is, it suggests that the way the spine is moving, because of those malformations and that kyphosis, it could be creating these little areas that are more vulnerable.
Like areas where blood flow might be different or where the discs are under more pressure, maybe.
Exactly. And those areas, well, they could be easy targets for bacteria that are just looking for a place to set up shop and cause an infection.
Wow. So it's not just the malformations themselves, it's how those malformations are affecting the overall shape, the whole structure of the spine that seems to be playing a role here.
You've got it. This study really drives home the point that we can't just look at one thing in isolation, you know? We have to look at the whole spine, the whole picture, when we're trying to understand why these breeds seem to be more prone to this disease.
It's like, it reminds me of those domino effects you see in like old movies. One thing leads to another and then another, and before you know it, you have this whole chain reaction happening.
That is such a great analogy, and this research, I think it's like finding one of those crucial dominoes in the chain. We don't have all the answers yet, but we have some pretty significant clues now about how these spinal malformations, that kyphosis, and the increased risk of discospondylitis, how they all might be connected.
And those clues could be huge, for guiding where we go from here with research and hopefully for improving how we care for these breeds in the future.
Absolutely. This study really opens up a whole new world of questions that we need to answer. Like, we know that all of the English bulldogs in the study who were diagnosed with discospondylitis had those butterfly vertebrae, but was it the malformations themselves that directly caused the infection? Or are there other things going on here, other factors we need to consider?
Right, because just because two things are often seen together, it doesn't necessarily mean that one caused the other.
It's
Right.
like there could be a whole cascade of events happening here. Maybe there's a genetic component,
Yeah.
something that makes these breeds more susceptible to both the malformations and the infections. Or maybe there are environmental factors, like could diet play a role? What about exercise? Or even exposure to certain types of bacteria? These could all be contributing.
It's like we're trying to solve this giant puzzle, and this study has given us a few of the key pieces, but we still need to find more to see the complete picture.
I love that analogy. And, just like with a puzzle, the more pieces we can find, the clearer the picture becomes. And that's what makes this kind of research so exciting. It feels like we're really on the cusp of something big here.
I agree. It feels like we're really at a turning point in how we think about and approach spinal health in these breeds.
I think so too. And I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a whole new wave of research in this area.
Well, I know. I'm excited to see where it goes. But for now, let's bring it back down to earth a bit. What does this research mean for the vets who are out there on the front lines caring for these French and English bulldogs? What are the practical takeaways they can use in their practice right now? So we've talked a lot about the research, the findings, the nitty-gritty of it all, but let's bring it home for our listeners.
Yeah.
What does all this mean for those who share their lives with these brachycephalic breeds? What does it mean for the Frenchies and the English bulldogs out there?
I think the biggest takeaway really is awareness. Just knowing that French and English bulldogs, they're predisposed to these kinds of spinal issues, the malformations, the potential for discospondylitis. Just knowing that is huge. It lets owners be more proactive.
So you're saying that even if someone's bulldog puppy seems perfectly healthy, like bouncing off the walls, full of energy, it's still important to talk to their vet about these risks.
Absolutely. Those early conversations with their vet, they can really help establish a baseline for the dog's spinal health. And it gives them a chance to talk about, preventative stuff.
Preventative stuff like what? What kind of things can owners do?
Well, for starters, having a good exercise routine, that's huge. And of course, maintaining a healthy weight. Those are both crucial, especially for these breeds.
Yeah, because those extra pounds, they put extra stress on their spines.
Yeah.
And we've already talked about how those spines might be more vulnerable.
Exactly. It's all connected. And beyond just those, preventative measures, owners also need to know the warning signs, the things that might mean something's off with their dog's spine.
So what should they be looking out for? What are some red flags?
Well, some of the early signs that can be pretty subtle, like if their dog's stiff, especially after they've been resting for a bit, or maybe they're hesitant to jump up on things, or they don't want to climb stairs like they used to. Even just changes in their posture could be a sign.
So it's really about paying attention to how their dog's moving, how they're behaving.
Exactly. Be observant. And if they notice anything at all that seems off, even if it's small, schedule a checkup with their vet. Don't wait. Early detection is key when it comes to spinal health, especially with these breeds.
So it's all about being proactive, being informed, and having those open lines of communication with their vet.
That's it. And I think that's something that's so important to emphasize. This research, it's not about scaring bulldog owners. It's about empowering them. Knowledge is power, right? And the more they know about these potential risks, the better advocates they can be for their dogs.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the owners either, right? This research, it has some pretty big implications for veterinary professionals too. especially those who see a lot of bulldogs.
Absolutely. For vets, this research really highlights just how important it is to have a high index of suspicion when it comes to discospondylitis in these breeds, even in the younger dogs.
Because for a long time, we've always thought of discospondylitis as something that mainly affects older dogs, right?
Exactly. But this research, it challenges that. It shows us that French and English bulldogs, they might be vulnerable a lot earlier than we thought.
So if a young bulldog comes in with a sore back or they're stiff, vets should be thinking about discospondylitis much sooner than they might have in the past.
Exactly. It needs to be higher on that list of potential diagnoses. And that could mean getting imaging done sooner, like those CT scans we talked about earlier. And potentially that could lead to a faster diagnosis and getting treatment started sooner.
And that earlier treatment could make all the difference for preventing complications down the road and just giving those dogs the best possible outcome.
Exactly. And it's not just about early diagnosis either. It's also about making sure those treatment plans are tailored to each dog. And that includes factoring in those vertebral malformations and understanding the role they might be playing.
So it's like this research, it's giving vets a whole new set of tools, a whole new way of thinking about and approaching these cases.
That's a great way to put it. And that's what makes this such an exciting time to be in veterinary medicine. We're constantly learning and evolving, finding new and better ways to care for our patients.
Well said. It's been absolutely fascinating diving into this research with you. And to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of discospondylitis in French and English bulldogs. Remember, knowledge is power. And the more we know, the better we can care for our four-legged friends. From Vet NeuroJar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.